Have Bitcoin detractors been right all along? Does capitalism squash creativity? Should you prefer a congressperson who crosses the aisle to get stuff done? Is there a right way to cancel student loan debt? We'll explore all of this and more on today's episode of Good Take, Bad Take. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of the Good Take, Bad Take podcast. This is the podcast where we gather social media posts, takes, videos that you see on your social media feed each week. We go through the good ones, highlight what's awesome about them. We also go through the bad ones, point out what's wrong with them and how they could be better. My name's Britt. I'm here with my co-host Donald. And before we get started, make sure to like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. It really helps us out. Likewise, as we do this show, make sure if you're listening to it, we've got a visual show companion that you can find. And I don't actually have a link for that at the moment. But if you go to our Instagram page at Good Take, Bad Take pod, you can find it there. And we'll get that updated here too. Well, maybe I'll put it in the show notes page. We kind of rebranded about a few episodes ago. So we're still getting all the links and stuff updated. But we'll have a visual show companion. If you are a previous fan of the Cringe Post podcast, you can also go to cringepost.com. And there should be links to it there as well. Anyways, now to get into these takes that we're going to go through. The first one that we've got here is from Peter Schiff. Donnie and I are both fans of Peter Schiff, but every now and then someone can have a bad take or a good take. So we'll talk about why this is good or bad here in a second. But Peter tweets out, last year the keynote was delivered by @Sailor. This is a keynote on Bitcoin at a conference. He told the audience to sell all their gold and buy Bitcoin. On the day he spoke, Bitcoin traded above $60,000, while gold was trading near $1,850. Since then, gold is down 4% and Bitcoin is down 73%. And this was tweeted out about an hour ago. And I'm reading this on a Monday night. What is it? It's November 14th. So this is kind of coming on the heels. If for those of you who don't pay attention to a lot of the financial market stuff or crypto stuff, FTX, crypto exchange, which basically people could buy and sell crypto on, basically absconded with, I think it was about $10 billion worth of people's money. And that contributed to a pretty big crash in the crypto market, Bitcoin among them, pushing it further down than it was already further down. So Peter Schiff has always been a pretty big anti-crypto Bitcoin guy. So this is pretty lockstep with how he's been. But yeah, curious to see, Donnie, what do you think about this take and Peter Schiff's overall take on Bitcoin and crypto?
I mean, it's interesting because I think we've probably said it in some of the previous episodes of Cringe Post, but I'm very pro Bitcoin in the sense that I like the idea of it, but I'm also not so gung ho that I think it's flawless or a totally safe investment. I'm actually kind of the same way with gold as it is in the current standing. So, if you were to say, should you put your money in gold for the long term versus like the stock market? I'm actually a little bit hesitant. I like gold because it's sound currency. I like it because it's a stable of some kind. However, I think gold also has problems in that it's a very conservative investment, but you can generally always outperform it with the stock market. Now, where we're going with mass inflation, where we're going with a government that seems to be less and less playing by its own imposed rule book, which surprise to those of us who don't think governments do that very well. Maybe sound money is a better call here. I think limiting the scope of this conversation to this particular tweet, though, I think he's right for calling out that this move. I think it's a good take because the idea of selling, if you're holding gold, I think that your fundamental purpose for gold isn't to make quick cash. It's probably not to make good returns. It's probably to try to stave off or fight inflation or, again, conservative holding for whatever reason, if you're worried about massive downturns in the market. And I think Bitcoin is much too unstable in the sense that a lot of people have it not knowing how it works, what it is. And so whenever you have a massive fad of any kind, even if it's a good thing, I think that it can be abused. And I think that's why you see this massive crash is because people, it's kind of like all the different keywords, like the .com bubble burst, it didn't mean that .coms weren't good. It didn't mean the tech sector was bad, but it did mean that a lot of people were overhyping themselves, not knowing what it was, and then falling victim to scams. So I think crypto is still pretty much in that space. And so I think selling gold to go into Bitcoin is probably not a good move. depending on what your Bitcoin, or excuse me, what your gold holdings were for. So I like this take from Peter Schiff.
Yeah, I like this take from Peter. I think it's a good take, and I also think almost all of Peter's takes on Bitcoin have been good, which I know you might not entirely agree with, but yeah, like the problem I have with Bitcoin, and I was just talking with a buddy about this last night, is that if I went and asked someone, that loves Bitcoin, like, why do you own Bitcoin? They would say, well, I think it's a good investment. And it's like, well, a good investment is something that has value in and of itself. It doesn't have value because it's an investment, right? So the reason you buy stock in a company is, yeah, it's a good investment, but that investment is tied to the value of what that company does. There's a utility that is tied directly to that share of stock that you own. And if that company stopped producing that value, that's most of the time, not always, but in theory and in most practical applications, that stock will go down, right? And so with gold, I like gold, not as like, obviously I agree with you that if you put, and I think it's factual that if you put your money in the market versus in gold, the market's going to outpace, how much gold returns and everything like that.
This is not financial advice, and neither of us are licensed financial individuals.
Yeah. that whole deal. Yeah. But I mean, you can just Google it, right? Like and look at a chart. It's out there. But oh man, you derailed my thought chain there, but that's good because I don't want to get sued. Okay. Yeah. So all that stuff is true, but gold is awesome and it has a leg up on Bitcoin. And that when someone asks me, why do you hold gold? Or why do you think anyone else would want to hold gold? I can say, hey, electronics, right? Like gold and precious metals are used in not as much, but still used in development of electronics because they're conductors. As well as people just want gold chains, they want gold rings, they want to wear gold, right? Like when I wanted to marry my wife, I bought her a ring. It had a diamond on it, which outside of wearing it on your finger, kind of doesn't have any other use, maybe for like a drill or something. And then it was, it was set in a gold ring, right? So people intrinsically just want gold, right? Bitcoin doesn't have the same thing. It's a digital thing. No one's wearing Bitcoin. You might say like, oh, I've got it in a digital format and I can see that I have it. But the problem is most people don't even hold it in a wallet, right? Like the actual utility that is behind Bitcoin, most people don't understand or don't value, which to me, the value of Bitcoin and most cryptocurrencies is that, oh, I can transact with someone across the world digitally, securely, and privately without any government being involved in the transaction. But the majority of the crypto market holds their crypto in these exchanges. So they don't actually hold it. All of their records of what they have are public. So none of the actual utility of the coin or the asset is being used. So it's purely, to me, it's just a big old bubble until people realize what it's actually doing or use it for what it's actually supposed to be used for. And so because of that, I just don't trust the price that's in it. And I think Peter Schiff more or less agrees with that. He's also somewhat of a fan of Monero, which is another cryptocurrency, which is actually private, which actually is the price to me is more lock in step with the utility that coin brings. And so I think to me, this is a good take. And I think all of Peter's past takes on Bitcoin being a bad investment as it currently stands. I think Bitcoin could be a good investment because of its utility, but as it stands right now, I don't think it is.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that I would push back on, not necessarily in defense of Bitcoin, but ultimately just kind of in the weakness of any kind of currency that you're going to use. So you talk about an intrinsic value to gold, but I mean that's just as technically malleable.
Sure.
The only difference is that it's much more long-standing, right? You have a much longer record of it. But at any point, gold could fall out of favor. It could be completely not used in electronics because of other developments, and not to mention that. When it really comes down to it, mines that contain gold reserves can flood the market to devalue it as well, if needed.
We find an asteroid with $50 trillion worth of gold, right?
Right. Well, and I think even as it currently stands, I think governments could do that if they so chose. If there was some benefit for them to do that, they could, because they hold gold reserves in many ways, even if it's not per the dollar or like it used to be, that there are gold reserves. And so the market manipulation isn't impervious. It's better than obviously a dollar, which I think is, But the thing with Bitcoin is you get a similar effect in perceived utility. But I think it's what you were saying and what I was kind of saying earlier, where the overhyping means the price is wrong, which I think is the best way that you articulate, what I was thinking earlier, is that the price for Bitcoin is not right because people aren't using it for its real value and it's a fad. And so the price is skyrocketing. And so that's the bad investment portion of it. I think in and of itself, it's not, there is value to it in that, it's supposed to have sort of a digital ledger to the point where you can't make more of Bitcoin on a whim. You can't just print more dollar bills in Bitcoin, right? You can't just do that like the Federal Reserve can, which is an intrinsic value. Like you said, there's the, totally anonymous exchange aspect of it and offline holding of it, which is awesome and great. But those things aren't the things being valued right now. But those things, I think, can be the equivalent in terms of perceived value as something that gold has, which, again, the utility of it can fluctuate depending on people's whims or the tech sector's need for them. So I wouldn't say that it's like gold to Bitcoin is like gold has all of these things that Bitcoin doesn't. I think it's more that gold has them in a much longer time frame, and it's a much more stable perceived value rather than Bitcoin, which is highly fluctuating and highly volatile. So yeah, it's not really a great investment for the long term. But I do think that, barring government regulation, which is a big but, but barring government regulation, I do think Bitcoin could bounce to a reasonable, stable, and maybe it's not Bitcoin, maybe it is something like Monero or another cryptocurrency. But I do think that there is value for the space, and when things simmer down, hopefully that will take part and displace something as archaic as a dollar.
Yeah, especially with things like the government doing the $600 audit of any Venmo transaction, or PayPal saying, hey, because PayPal used to be, still is, a really good way to transfer money internationally, right? Like I think for like a $3 fee, I can send something to Italy, right? And like it's easy. It's almost instant. I push a button and somehow money shows up in someone else's account and they figure it all out. Problem with that though, I don't know if you saw this, but they, PayPal re-implemented the $2,400 per instance of, despicable speech that they find on your profile or whatever, that they can find you. So, as these payment processors that have allowed us to internationally trade and do things like that become more strict, I think a more decentralized currency like this can fill that void. And then it will become valuable, but it's hard for me to think that it's worth $60,000, right? Per coin of it. I could see it being worth, maybe double what the value that it's transacting or something like that, but definitely not 60x what it is. So
yeah, no, I agree.
All right, moving on to our next one. We have got a Twitter user who tweets out, capitalism squashes creativity, even though creativity is one of humanity's best attributes. What do you think, Donnie?
Well, that's obviously the reason why every capitalist regime always goes for the artists first. Oh, sorry, did I say capitalist? I meant communist. If you look to any authoritarian system that does not that cracks down on free exchange, that's one of the first things they'll do. They'll limit who you can trade with outside of your whatever region it is. If it's a country, it's a country. If it's a closer to like a state, it's a state. Whatever it is, they crack down on who you can trade with, and then they crack down on artists. Those are the and then guns. Some in those three are the first three in some order of the ways that they limit, because creativity and free expression is an attribute of freedom. And in order for creativity and expression to flourish, you actually need components of maybe not capitalism per se in the strict economic sense, but you need free exchange. You need free exchange of ideas, of inspiration, of people being able to appreciate. You need those kinds of attributes. And so creativity and capitalism actually link very, very well. I wouldn't go as far as to say, creativity needs capitalism, but it definitely needs a very healthy free exchange of some kind. And the best way you get that is through free markets. And I would say free markets help creativity by and large, almost with no drawbacks, frankly.
So good take, bad take.
I think it's a terrible take. This is a bad take, man.
I agree with you on that. It's interesting that they use the word creativity. And I think you were kind of gravitating towards the understanding of it being like artistic, I guess, creativity.
Sure, yeah.
But like I would view creativity not just in that way, but also in just in innovation, right? Like I think that an artist painting a painting is the same as Ford going over to Japan and adopting the assembly line. Like those are both very creative endeavors to envision translating something from one culture into an American version of it that's streamlined and efficient, versus seeing something in the world and translating it to a painting. They're very, even though they're different in application, the process and the brain muscles that they use to come about are the same. And so I think the question, and I think this is a bad take, I agree with you, I think the question I would ask this person is like, okay, well, sure, like creativity at the end of the day, at some point, has to be incentivized, right, to exist. Under which system will create it? Is there resources to incentivize creativity to occur? And it's like, it's definitely not under communism, definitely not under socialism, right? Because you have to have creatives get better at their craft. You know, my dad, when we were playing music and stuff, always harped on us. He's like, look, I know you guys are artists. I know you guys are like, you got the long emo hair and the skinny jeans and all that stuff. If any of you guys listen to Cringe Post, you saw the deepest V and all this different things. It was kind of funny, man. We were Donnie's brother got married. Was that a week and a half ago? That was a week ago.
Just a week ago.
Yeah, and David's been a guest on the show before. So congrats to him. Awesome. But I met some of the guys. Like one of them came up. I think it was David. Came up and he's like, "Hey, Britt," and I was like, "I don't think I know you." And he's like, "No, I listen to your podcast. I'm friends with Donnie and David." And it was super cool, man. Because him and then there's a guy named Nick that I met as well that listens to the show and some other guys, and you know, they were all being in there and talking, and they flew from all over the country, right? And your brother, right, figured out how to create an online community that created a ton of value that translated not just as value digitally, but translated into enough value that people like found friendship to come across the country to come hang out for a guy's wedding, right? Like that's really, really fantastic and amazing. And so like that's incentivized by the fact that there are structures to monetize, right? I'm not saying that like David gets rich off of friendships. I'm just saying that like his creativity is enabled by the fact that he can support himself in some form or fashion, or at least support the creative endeavor because there's enough resources that exist for that to occur.
Well, even thinking about, you know, the main metric where a lot of these, you know, people where we met a lot of friends like this and stuff is through, you know, the social platform Discord or the social platform Twitch. Free. And the thing is, yeah, it's like Discord and Twitch both are free. And I don't know specifically about Discord. I know Twitch loses money every single year. And so you're like, oh, well, if Twitch is so great and it isn't making money, well, then maybe capitalism isn't so great for creativity. But the only reason Twitch can survive in this is because it's being funded through Amazon, which, you know, they're trying to make it cost effective. They're trying to make it profitable. But right now they view it as a utility that helps their other business, metrics to make money. So ultimately, it's like people who would want to say that creativity is, you get creative results from things that don't make money and stuff like that. Ultimately, they have to be sustained somehow. Like you said earlier, what's going to provide enough resources? And the only way that you end up with resources supporting ventures that are not inherently making money is that you have value from other places going to cover that. Yep. So in the case of like Twitch, Amazon bought it and is subsidizing the losses that it costs to run this because they view it as an investment either to draw people to their main, subscription of Amazon Prime, or just to draw people in through advertisers and through other Amazon products to get the data, whatever it is. The value is being offset. So the only way you can have sort of a very free artistic, it doesn't cost you anything to live and everyone can be artists and creative, is by forcing another class of human to be into complete working slaves and forcing all of their value they're producing to cover the enlightened class who gets to be creative, whether that's through artistry, whether that's through innovation, whatever it is. It's you can't have pure creativity with no value added in the equation without value being taken out of something.
The creativity needs to be as good as, be good enough that someone who produces food is willing to give you, a pizza to enjoy your creation. And unfortunately, right, like not everyone is going to make it in that way because not everyone can be as good as they can. But that's where this take is so wrong, right? Is that without that incentive, without that feedback mechanism, artists are not going to get better. And this is where I was going before I went off on that tangent. And my dad said, work on your craft, because if you don't work on it, no one's going to pay you for it. And it's like, okay, you're right. Like if I'm a starving artist, the only incentive for me to practice my instrument, to figure out how to program lights, to figure out how to do better at a live show, is that when I do bad at a live show, that's I'm eating McDonald's that night, versus if I do good, maybe I'll eat teriyaki and I'll get to sleep at a hotel or something like that, right? So like that incentive, the fact that there are resources to give, creates better art. It creates better artists. It creates more flourishing within the artistic community. And yes, there are always going to be artists that aren't going to do a good job. There are going to be artists that don't make it. They might even be great artists and they don't make it for one reason that isn't related to their art. But that doesn't negate the fact that in order for truly great art to exist and to continue to grow and be better and better and better and for people to develop, you have to have resources there to give to them. And that requires capitalism and innovation.
The last thing I'll say is kind of shifting to the other point you were making, more on that innovation side of things. I'm currently reading through my coworker, who I've talked about a lot, his new book, Time to Think Small. Really, really great book. Ooh. Talks about the ways that small innovations are helping the environment specifically. Nice. And one of the things he talks about in there, one of the things he mentions is how in big government or in big corporations, the larger they are, the more stagnation there is, the less innovation, the less creativity to tackle problems there is. And that's the great thing about capitalism, is capitalism and free markets incentivize small entrepreneurs and small solutions to big problems, even when there are big government entities or big corporations. It's like, if you as a small person think, I can do that better, and in a free market where there's no hands on the scales, you can go crowdfunding. You can say, look at this better alternative we have that's more creative, and you can get rewarded for that. Yeah. And then you can meet that small niche in the market. And the other great thing about free markets is that not everything has to be super big. Obviously, with the name, it's Time to Think Small. A lot of what he's advocating for is how, there are some problems environmentally, and I would just say broadly in society and culture, that are small enough that they don't, like, if you were to launch a major investment from a big company or a big government program, the problem itself is too small to warrant that kind of thing. You would end up with tons of waste, but you can have people who are directly affected by that small problem or that small area, and they can innovate in a creative way that's to scale with the problem. One of the examples he gives early in the book is two surfers who were tired of trash in the ocean when they were surfing. And it was on this particular coast, so they developed Sea Bin, which is basically a trash bin that sucks in garbage and microplastics and filters the water out. Ooh. And they went to Kickstarter and they crowdfunded it, and they sold it to like marinas and areas. And there's like probably 800 something of them out in the oceans now, which is awesome. But it's also much, much smaller than a massive government bureaucratic entity would want to take on and do. But they're able to fix those local problems to them through creative solutions and creative problems, because there is the capitalistic incentive to be able to make money for that through that free exchange. And they were able to solve a problem to them, totally reliant and flourishing in creativity.
Absolutely. All right, moving on to our next take. We've got a tweet from Positively Libertarian. And they tweet out, the biggest trick corporations ever pulled was switching the name of the enemy from, quote, corporatism to, quote, capitalism. It's a shield which protects them from independence, uniting to cancel the corporate charter. What are your thoughts? I mean, it's in the name, libertarians. So.
I was going to say, it's hard. This doesn't sound like a super Cato adjacent take, so I think it's a pretty based one. Then again, actually, Cato's probably pretty good on corporatism, so I don't want to shoot. I'm not going to shoot shots on things I'm making up. They're pretty good on corporatism. But no, I think this is a good take. It's hard to, when I'm talking with people, a lot of the time you have to work your way back because of the negative stigma capitalism has from this switch that's been done, and you have to explain what corporatism even is and the difference between it and capitalism. Another term that people use to that's sort of synonymous with corporatism that I find helpful and I will usually link in both, is crony capitalism, right? That's the sort of the other name for this. And I usually like to link it first saying, well, what you're talking about is crony capitalism. That's actually a little bit more called corporatism. And that way they sort of see the link from, okay, you are still talking about something that I think it is, which is they think it's capitalism. And you're like, well, I'm not totally dismissing what you're talking about. I'm addressing that. But actually, that's also corporatism because of these linkings with the government and stuff.
Yeah. So good take. Yes, is what I hear. I think it's a really good take. I remember I have this buddy of mine, and very smart dude, one of the smartest guys I know, and we were talking about the 2008 financial crisis and talking about how the banks, and he had just watched The Big Short, and was talking about like, oh yeah, like they all got bailed out. But he's like, oh, that's just capitalism, baby. I was like, no, that's not. It's not capitalism, man. Like, they have lied to you. Like, what part of free markets is a bank and financial managers making decisions knowing that the government can take tax dollars away from the average person and bail them out. Like, that's what part of capitalism or free market or rugged individualism is part of that. I was like, that's corporatism, man. Like, I don't like that either. I agree with you that this is awful and ugly and bad, but they've tricked you in associating that with the word capitalism and free markets. Because in a free market society, a bank that screws over its customers like that goes under, right? Like, it doesn't exist anymore. The managers that did do that are never going to be hired anywhere ever again, because there's no guarantee that if they that they're going to actually perform well. In fact, there's a big old sticker on them that says, hey, these guys ran this other institution into the ground. So if you look at any of the bad actors within the past 2 decades financially, or any sort of corporation that have gotten away with things, that have done awful stuff, and then maybe paid like a fine or something like that, but ruined millions of people's lives, it's all been because they could literally say, my risk is covered by some government action or some function of government. Like, I think about I think it was Merck. Yeah, Merck came out with Vioxx, basically an alternative to aspirin or ibuprofen for treating pain. And it turned out that I think they killed something like 125,000 people through blood clots with it, right? So they got sued for it, and they sold like something like $12 billion worth of the drug, and then they had to settle for like $2 billion or something like that. I might be getting the numbers wrong, but it's some magnitude of that. And it's basically like, for them, they're like, well, the cost of doing business, of creating a drug that kills people, is that we might have to go to the courts for judges that we've probably sponsored, or paid for to get elected. And we might pay a little bit of a fine, and we're just going to factor that into the price of the drug. And at the end of the day, even if we kill, a couple 100,000 people, it's going to be fine. And then you see, these drug companies with the vaccine and stuff saying, hey, you're going to mandate it, and the government is going to mandate it. And also, I want you to write in there that we are not liable for any damages that they cause. It's like, what part of that is free markets, right? Like, free markets means that if I choose to do an action, I also accept all the consequences that come about as that action. So yeah, I think this tweet is spot on. It's a really, really good take, because it succinctly and aptly teases out how they have blended these terms, and they use the definition shift to totally flip your perspective of what free markets are. Like, I totally agree with everyone that doesn't like the current environment in the United States and doesn't like the relationship between corporations and the government. I just wouldn't call it capitalism. That's corporatism.
Yeah, and I think that when that distinction isn't made, right, and you're under this false assumption of, I have to defend every business if I'm pro free market. I think this is probably one of the areas where younger people who haven't totally thought through their ideology, they just kind of generally know, well, I like capitalism. Maybe they're like a conservative or a Republican or something, and they say, I like business, and they don't really think about sort of this distinction between small business and this corporate big business that's in bed with government, and they're almost they feel positioned where they have to defend business. And as someone who's very progressive on the left will, like, in your example, bring up like the bailouts from 2008 because of the housing crisis, or some other kind of example of a large shady actor doing something with government interests, tipping the scales, crushing competition. And the person who hasn't made that distinction of corporatism, who just knows they kind of need to be pro free market or pro business, they get confused, and they're like, well, how am I supposed to think about this? And honestly, I think there's a good many people who kind of slide into just straight into progressivism, because they think, well, shoot, that's not truly like a competitive market. The free market's a lie. The free market's a scam, and businesses will do anything they can to defeat the other person, whether it's through legitimate means or not. We need to rein them in through government control. And they miss the link there that, no, it's the government intervention that's made it possible for these bad actors to do bad things that are anti-competitive. So I think just knowing that distinction can put a lot of people's minds at ease, and give, in part of what we do here, we try to plant seeds in people's minds that even if they don't come to our total way of thinking on every issue, if you can plant that seed of like, your cognitive dissonance has got to be twitching a little bit here, that's what we want to do. And I think that there are a lot of people who have those seeds planted because of this business thing, but they don't recognize that it's a false seed. It's not an actual contradiction to say I love free markets, I love business and competition, and I hate big corporations that abuse powers of government, because that's what so much of the complaints that just get lobbied against free markets are.
Yeah, I mean, that's the classic. I like what you said about the seed that makes the cognitive dissonance twitch. I have another buddy, same thing. He's like, well, I just don't like, it lays out the whole corporatism thing, confuses it for capitalism. And I'm like, okay, well, what mechanism, by which mechanism are these corporations able to do all these things that you don't like, you know?
Right.
And he's like, oh, well, through the government. I'm like, okay, right. And I'm like, so how do we fix it? He's like, well, we just need to get the right people in office or things like that. It's like, well, but didn't you just say that they pay to get the people into office? So why don't we just take the lever away, right? Like, there is no lever. Exactly. They don't have a monopoly on the force. They don't have access to monopoly on force. And, you know, since then he's kind of come around, which is really awesome. At least, and, you know, to be fair, you and I, right? Like, if someone came with an ulterior, not motive, but ulterior argument to what we're saying, you know, about corporatism or capitalism or anything like that, I'd love to hear it, because I want, when my philosophy, my moral principles are challenged in such a way that they don't make sense or they're not congruent across my entire life, it keeps me up at night until I figure out, and I either change my opinion, or I figure out, you know, why my argument is weak, you know, in one way, and then I figure out where it needs to be strengthened, or what I need to educate myself on. And so, whole reason we have this podcast, like you're saying.
Absolutely right.
All right, next take. We've got two tweets. The second tweet is the one that I think we kind of want to decide whether it's a good take or a bad take. So the first one is in response to a Jack Posobiec tweet about the elections that occurred, midterm elections that just happened. Not looking super great for the Republicans at this time. And this person tweets out, any chance Masters and Boebert can still win? If Republicans can lock up Arizona Senate, 52 Senate seats is in play. Boebert, I want to win because I thought she was a fighter and she annoys the left. Neither here nor there. Obviously kind of a Republican person. And then someone follows up, and this is the tweet we're going to talk about. They say, why would you want someone to earn $174,000 a year to annoy the left? I'd rather have someone who's going to cross the aisle and get stuff done for all of us. Also, I can't speak for the whole left, but she doesn't annoy anyone. She's inconsequential. What do you think, Donnie? It's a hard one.
Yeah, it's like it's not a great take. I mean, you're not like cheering for it because you know what I mean. Like,
I like the first sentence.
Yeah, exactly. On the one hand, they almost seem right in the sense that they're like why do you have so much, you know, stakes being put on this individual person for this purpose? That seems stupid. And to some degree, I do agree that the like own the libs movement in and of itself is not that great. Now, I think good things come from it, but I don't think it's, I don't think it's like a great aim. That shouldn't be your principle. You know, that shouldn't be what your goal is. Like, all right, I'm going to go there, I'm going to own the libs, and that's great. So I agree in the one sense that that's a big waste of money, and it's like if that's your end goal, then you need to reorient. Unfortunately, this take doesn't get so great when you dig into it and they say, I'd rather have someone who wants to get stuff done for both of us across the aisle. And you're like, oh no. Oh my goodness. Well, and then like I don't really get the last bit. Like, I can't speak for the whole left, but she doesn't annoy anyone. I mean, that's just patently not true. That's just completely wrong. She's inconsequential. Probably not. I wouldn't say she's inconsequential. I don't know if she's as consequential in the ways that people who support her think she is, right? I think she does draw attention to things. I think she riles up people, but maybe that's, you know, maybe she riles up more people against her than for her. Whatever it is. I wouldn't say she's inconsequential. So I'd say overall this is a bad take. It leans into more in that category. It starts out okay, but it kind of gets lame because we wade back into that. Oh, let's just work with both teams to increase the government debt and tax people more and do things and tell them how to live more.
You're an Office fan, right?
Yes. Oh yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Watched
cool.
it as it came out.
Okay. Oh wow. Okay.
I'm a day one. Yeah.
Wow. Good for you. You are. I bow to you, elite. I didn't start watching it until like season 5.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I've since binged it many times on Netflix and other places. But This reminded me of whenever someone brings up I just want someone that can get stuff done argument. It reminds me of the episode where there's kind of like no manager because Michael Scott is off doing his own thing. And Jim's like, it's really amazing when you let people get their work done, like good things happen. And like the office is running smoothly and it's great. And Michael Scott's not a great manager. And it turns out that when he gets involved and gets stuff done, the office runs pretty poorly and it's really hard for normal people to work. Now, just apply that to the government. It's the exact same thing, right? Like when senators and Congress people are doing their thing and getting things done, usually what it ends up with is a bunch of dead people in a foreign country, both of our own or someone else's, or a bunch of your money being taken and being spent on things like FTX, the crypto exchange we just talked about, right. And being wasted in all manners of ways. So I think it's a bad take, in my opinion, because I like the first sentence. Like, why would you want someone to earn $174,000 a year to just annoy someone? Like, yeah, that's not a good use of money. And it's also not a good use of money to have someone get paid $174,000 a year to, make fancy speeches and things like that and represent something for a portion of the country. But then they go, I'd rather have them get stuff done. It's like, well, that's not even worth $174K a year. I would pay $174,000 a year to not have them get stuff done, to not have them come in and be able to make decisions for people that, don't. And elections are so interesting to me because they really reveal the problem with like trying to have rulers. It's like there's so much at stake because you are so concerned and worried that if the other side gets 51%, that they will rule over you and force their will upon you to do things that you don't want to do. It's like, how about we just get rid of that, man? How about people can voluntarily associate the way that they want to associate, do the things they want to do and not aggress on anyone else? Problem solved. Obviously, there's a lot more to it, right? You have to have a moral people for that. But it's just funny. Like the every election is the most consequential election of our lives is somewhat true in that way because with the government continuing to grow in power, there is a lot more at stake because it's like whoever is in power can hypothetically send your child off to war.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And I mean, the people who, it's funny because the people who make a big scene like this, like Boebert specifically is mentioned in this, this person really wants to downplay them and like she's inconsequential, but like, man, the people who are really inconsequential are the ones who were paying $174,000 a year or just going in, voting in lockstep with whatever letter is by their name. They're being whipped by the majority or minority whips, and they're falling in line, voting for whatever the few people on the rules committee allow, what bills they allow to be heard. And so it's funny because this person acts like I'd rather have someone who's going to cross the aisle to get stuff done. But when it comes down to it, especially when you're talking about the House of Representatives, although there is a senator mentioned as well, but when you're talking about the House in particular, it's like one person, if you really want one person to quote unquote get stuff done, you actually need someone who's going to stick their neck out and be the sort of disruptor. The only person who I've seen get something done individually on this level who hasn't been worked its way up through the puppeteering behind the scenes is when Thomas Massey made everyone come in for a forced vote on the horrible COVID spending bill, right? And Trump blasted him for that, railed against him because Trump is not exactly a principled man. And but yeah, like in terms of an individual actually making something happen or getting something done, that's the only example I can think in the last probably 4 or 5 years of national congressional politics in the House of Representatives of an individual doing something. Have there been bills passed? Yes. Have they been bipartisan? Actually, a lot of them have, and a lot of them have been actively making your life worse through increasing things like inflation, like that COVID spending bill and stuff. So if we're talking about an individual making change to get stuff done, well, if you actually want an individual to make change to get stuff done, you have to have someone who's kind of going to be willing to not make friends. And if you just want stuff to get done, well, yeah, sure, vote for anyone. But at that point, I don't want that. Count me out of that for sure.
Yep. All right. Moving on to our last one. We've got an article from The Hill, or a headline, and then we've got 2 tweets underneath it. And The Hill tweets out, #breaking, appeals court blocks Biden student debt cancellation plan. Pretty funny. And the timing of it's funny. And then a person,
Shocking.
I know, shocking. 6 days after the midterms, the carrot that he held out to students,
after it was found out that the red wave wasn't such a wave because of the youth vote.
Yes. Yep. And someone responds to it and says, so we can bail out businesses, we can bail out individuals in the government with PPP loans, but not a few shillings to help students. Got it. And then someone else replies to that tweet. Our government is a federal republic. The president doesn't have the authority without Congress to cancel student debt. Like most things, this needs to be done the quote right way. Sorry, I'm chuckling. I'm giving away what I think of it. But what do you think of it,
Yeah. It's a bad take. It's a bad take. Again, there are pieces of it that are fine. I mean, if I wasn't so disillusioned with the system as a whole, I understand this idea. There's division of powers. You can't just unilaterally do things and cancel things. However, it's just really funny that this person said, like most things, it needs to be done the right way, which is to say, no, you can't choose to, steal someone's money without their consent and pay another area of someone else's debts off. Unless you do it through these proper procedures. If you, get the right paper signed and the right people to give their stamp to it, then you can rob that guy to pay the other one.
Yeah, just appear before the Inquisition court. Then it's done the right way, whether we burn you or not.
Exactly. And even the tweet before it, which isn't the one that's being evaluated here today, but I do want to highlight that even though their point is, oh, we should be paying this off, they do accurately say, oh, we can bail out businesses, we can bail out individuals and the government with PPP loans, but not a few shillings. I get it. Not the best examples for them to use because the PPP loans and the other things like that was a direct result of government actions that caused businesses to not be open. So as far as the PPP loans go, I'm a little bit more sympathetic to that because the government actively told people you can't go to work and you can't run your business. But if this person wanted to make a stronger point, they could say we can bail out businesses, we can bail out big banks, we can send troops off, we can send money to Ukraine, whatever it is, but we can't bail out student loans or whatever. At that point, I'd get it. There's hypocrisy, but unfortunately, this person totally misses the mark in every regard. But yeah, this last take, of course, is the one we are evaluating, and I think it's a pretty bad take.
Yeah, I think it's bad as well. Like, even if we buy into the system, right, that there needs to be a process for how this is all done. It's like, okay, when has that process been followed? Like you say, like most things, it needs to be done the right way. It's like, what consequential things has that process been followed through for, the past 20 years, even the past 60 years, maybe even ever since Teddy Roosevelt? Like, when has that process been followed properly? It's like executive orders get increased with every single president that comes into power. Maybe not with Trump. I can't recall, but it's basically the same thing. Like it's exponential ever since that became a thing that you can do. Things like wars, things like most spending, like you were saying in the last take, they wanted to pass the freaking CARES Act, the biggest spending bill that has ever existed in the United States history, $6 trillion, enough to give 6 million Americans $1 million each. They wanted to pass that without coming in to vote, without being on record. And Thomas Massie, the one guy out of, however many there are, came out and said, hey, like, you got to come in and be on record for this vote. And everyone hated him. So it's like, man, even on the most consequential things, these people don't want to be held accountable. They don't want to do it, quote, the right way. If our framing is that the right way is to do the process. So they don't even do it that way. Again, to take it a step further, I don't think that there is anything right about involuntarily taking things from people and to pay for stuff. Because the right way to cancel debt is for the person that gave the money, that loaned the money to the person, to say, hey, your debt is forgiven. That's the only way that debt can lawfully and not lawfully, morally be forgiven, without coercion or anything like that. And then people will say, well, what, the government is the one that made the loans, to these students because governments took over student loan debt. It's like, well, where did the government get the money? It's not like they produced it. They took it from other people who produced it. So technically, the taxpayer loaned it to them. And if the taxpayer doesn't want to fund that loan, then they shouldn't do it. We played a show last week on Friday, right before your brother's wedding. And I was talking with the owner of this bar out here in Everett, and he took out. He had just redone the whole bar, renovated and everything, like 2 weeks before Governor Inslee here in Washington State shut down the state. And then he had to take out, from the government, $150,000 loan to keep everyone employed and all this stuff. And they told him, hey, we're not going to start making you do payments, for 2 years after you take it. And he's like, okay, sounds good. That must mean there's no interest on it or whatever. And so then, I think it's last month, the 2-year timeline kind of came up. And so he was like, okay, I'm going to start making payments on it. Comes to find out that the government has actually been charging interest on that loan the past 2 years. So he's hit with a $15,000 interest payment right off the bat. Right. And so even the people, the businesses, the small businesses that got these loans, they're screwed too, man. Like, it's not like the students are just getting the short end of it. It's like, no, basically everyone that's not, that performing arts center that got $200 million, anyone that's not smaller, anyone that's not bigger than that has gotten screwed by this entire thing. It was a bait and switch. It was a trap. It was the candy on the end of the stick that got you into the van. Like, all of this was a ploy to spend your money, to tax you. And then at the end of the day, they're still going to stick you with the bill. Yeah, we loan money to businesses. Those small businesses, and when I say small, I mean businesses under $50 million, they're all screwed still right now. It's not like they're coming out on top of this.
And to the point this guy makes, where our government is a federal republic, and we have a system for the way to do things. On the inverse of what you're just saying, of how the system doesn't operate in that way, the system doesn't operate in the way where all of those things you mentioned, whether it's the PPP loans being said, hey, you can pay back 2 years later, whether it's this appeals court blocking after the election of things, the way that the system actually works, whether it's spelled out or not, is that you put that carrot in front of the horse until they walk into the mud during the next person's term. Once you've gotten out of power, once you're out of there for 4 years, once the other team is in control of the House and the Senate, whatever it is, you can wash your hands of it, because guess what? You get a pension for the rest of your life. You get some fat paycheck as a politician.
Yep.
You're living in Martha's Vineyard. You're fine. You don't have to deal with any of the consequences. But you can essentially burn the fields to ward off the intruders. And then, oh boy, when it's time to replant and everyone's got to buckle down and they're looking for help because they're hungry because you burned all their crops. Oh, it's not my problem anymore. I'm not in office. I'm sorry about that. So that's the way the system actually works, because it's a system where major power shifts every 2 to 4 years or whatever. There's no long-term incentives to keep things going well. So you can dangle things right in front of an election and then take it away at the last second.
Yeah, it's all the bargain and trade. Like, I think about the like some of the gun bills that they were voting on, and you actually had Republicans in red districts that had just been elected. And it's like their election's not going to be for another 6 years, and they're voting yes on some of these things, right? Because what they're doing is they're trading, right? Yep. So they're saying, hey, you do this favor for me later, and I'll give you my yes vote for this bill that is actually against what my constituents want, because in 6 years, my constituents are going to forget that I even ever voted on this. Or like Thomas Massey was showing, maybe we'll do a vote in such a way that I'm not even going to be on record, here voting for this thing. Yep. So these people are they're power brokers. They trade favors. They don't actually, even in this system that's supposed to be federal constitutional republic, they don't even represent the interest of their constituents. They represent their own interests. And they will sell you out to get even just $1 more. They're not to be trusted. And I sympathize, right, with the first person's tweet. It's like, you're right. Like, if they're going to take money from us, like, at least give it to where it's going to be effective, right? At least. But the problem is, it's like the people that they think are not being screwed are being screwed. Like, we're all being screwed. The people that always end up winning are the ones that are the elites and the ones that are in power. If only they would just let us have our money that we have worked for and earned, and to spend the way that we want. Everything would be a lot better.
Yes, sir.
All right, folks. Thanks for hanging out with us. If we had any takes that you thought maybe the opposite of us on, we'd love to hear from you in our DMs or on YouTube comments or anything like that. We had a great one. What was it? I can't. You'll have to go look at it. It's on our one about Nazis. It's a really funny comment. So it was very well said. So I hope that person listened to the show, because we gave them a shout out. But it was you are the Naris, please. Yes, yeah. So they couldn't even spell. I don't know what a Naris is, actually.
I don't either.
I'm assuming they're calling us Nazis.
Couldn't be. No.
Yeah. Anyways, we love hanging out with you. We'll catch you next time. Peace.